Okay, but I'm talking here about what he's talking about, the idea that Antifa needs to go out in the streets, and if the Nazis are marching, Antifa needs to go out and punch them in the head. He's not the only person saying this. Mark Bray is a historian and lecturer at Dartmouth University, and he's defending Antifa. He was on MSNBC fully defending this vile, violent, communist anarchist group.
How do far-right movements grow? I say they grow by becoming normalized, by not being confronted, by being able to present themselves as family-friendly and respectable. So part of the reason why the alt-right called themselves alt-right is to present that mainstream image. And the opposition that people showed in Charlottesville really marred and tainted that. So I think that by showing up and confronting it, it prevents the ability of being able to be presented as mainstream. And connected that, I think really you need to be able to prevent them from being able to organize. People who are involved in politics know that for movements to expand, they need to be able to organize and grow. And if you stop that, it prevents it.
Okay, this is sheer nonsense. What he is saying here, that people who engaged in violence with the Nazis and white supremacists in Charlottesville did the country a service, absolute crap. This is he wrote in his piece that the Antifa has been fighting Klansmen and fascists for years, and then he specifically talks about how they helped stop Hitler, except for how they didn't stop Hitler. Right, he says, in retrospect, anti-fascists have concluded it would have been much easier to stop Mussolini back in 1919 when his first fascist nucleus had 100 men, or to stamp out the far-right German Workers' Party, which had only 54 members when Hitler attended his first meeting, before he transformed it into the National Socialist German Workers' Party. So he says that, and not just, but he's saying they shouldn't just do this through education. He says the first anti-fascists fought Benito Mussolini's black shirts in the Italian countryside, exchanged fire with Adolf Hitler's brown shirts in the taverns and alleyways of Munich, and defended Madrid from Francisco Franco's insurgent nationalist army. Yeah, how'd that go? How'd that go? All three of those times, the bad guys won. So how'd that go? I mean, I want to talk a little bit about this myth that armed violence by communists in the Weimar Republic would have stopped the Nazis. There was armed violence by communists in the Weimar Republic. It was one of the driving forces behind the Nazis' success. People looked at the communists and they said, okay, if we have to decide between communist violence and fascist violence, we'll go with the fascists. Okay, this is from Richard Evans's book, The Coming of the Third Reich. Quote, a graphic account of the life of the committed communist activists during the Weimar Republic was later provided by the memoirs of Richard Krebs. Clashes with the police strengthened his hatred of them and their bosses, the social democratic rulers of the city. The communists refused to work with the social democrats. It says, Krebs later described how committed communists would attend street demonstrations with pieces of lead piping in their belts and stones in their pockets, ready to pelt the police with. I want to tell you the rest of this story and why it is that groups like Antifa only grow the alt-right, only grow the neo-Nazis, only grow the neo-Confederates, only grow the white supremacists. But it wasn't just that the communists and the Nazis went at one another. Paramilitary battles were common, by the way. Here's some statistics about the paramilitary battles. In the aftermath of World War I, the German army was essentially disbanded by the Versailles Treaty, and there were a lot of ex-military people roaming around. The communists grabbed some of them, and what were called the Freikorps, grabbed grabbed another. They formed things like the Steel Helmets and the Freikorps, and these were all militia groups, basically, local militia groups that wandered the countryside fighting each other and, quote-unquote, defending the population from the various entities. From 1924 to 1929, it was claimed that 29 Nazi activists had been killed by communists. Communists reported 92 workers had been killed in clashes with fascists from 24 to 30. 26 members of the Steel Helmets were sort of this veterans group, were said to have fallen in the fight against communism. In 1930, the figures rose dramatically in the lead up to the Nazis taking power. This was a key factor in the rise of the Nazis. In 1930, the figures rose dramatically. The Nazis claimed to have suffered 17 deaths, rising to 42 in 1931, 84 in 1932. Remember, 1932 is the year the Nazis essentially paved their way to power. In 1932, the Nazis reported nearly 10,000 of their rank and file had been wounded in clashes with their opponents. Well, according to Mark Bray, wouldn't that have stopped them? I mean, you obviously had armed resistance. Why didn't that stop them? The communists reported 44 deaths in fights with the Nazis in 1930, 52 in 1931, 75 in the first 6 months of 1932 alone. And the number of dead in the year to March 1930 to March 1931 was no fewer than 300 dead in these various battles. I mean, serious stuff. I mean, it makes Charlottesville look like a piker's game. The number of people who are dying in these meetings. And communists would break up Nazi meetings. At one meeting, Krebs went and he broke up a Nazi speech by Hermann Göring. Right? Göring would become the second in command to Hitler. He said that he, quote, made sure that each man was armed with a blackjack or brass knuckles. A terrifying melee followed. Blackjacks, brass knuckles, clubs, heavy buckled belts, glasses, bottles were the weapons used. Göring, he stood calmly on the stage, his fists on his hips. Evans reports scenes like this were being played out all over Germany in the early 1930s. The Nazis made their money off these sorts of things. If you want to make the alt-right more popular, all you have to do is go out in the streets and fight them. Then they get to look tough. They get to look like they win. They get to look like they're victims at the same time, like they're fighting a defensive battle when really what they're doing is promulgating an evil ideology. Again, this is Richard Evans, okay? Goebbels made his reputation, above all, as regional leader of Berlin, where his fiery speeches, his incessant activity, his outrageous provocations of the Nazis' opponents, and his calculated staging of street fights and meeting hall brawls to gain the attention of the press won the party a mass of new adherents. Young, disenchanted men who have nothing better to do with their lives are looking for a movement to belong to and that will engage in violence. It makes them feel tough. It makes them feel special. This is why you see, Christopher Cantwell in that Vice video talking about how many guns he carries and how he works out all the time and makes himself more ready for violence. This is a thing, okay? And when Antifa plays right into their hands, not only are they doing something evil when they shut down normal conservatives, they're doing something evil when they fight these Nazis in the streets with their fists. Okay, that's why we have police in this country. Okay, we have very able police in this country. And the idea that we need Antifa in the streets as some sort of grand and glorious mission is really disgusting. It's a way of legitimizing a group that, by the way, is communist, anarchist, and fights law-abiding people too, not just white supremacists.